Hello, this is Karen Johnson with another in our series of Proctor's historic videos, preserving the history of Proctor's. Today is October 26th, 2015, and our guest is Dan Sheehan, who is the manager of operations at Proctor's and has had just about every other possible job that there is.
Actually, I've only had 3.
Oh.
Okay, that's a good starting point. I came here as the IATSE sound guy in 1991.
What's IATSE?
IATSE is the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, better known as the Stagehands Union. I was the sound guy till about 95, then I got promoted to the job of production manager, which I had till 2006 when we hired Keith, and Bob Warlock went into semi-retirement and I became operations director. So it's actually only 3 jobs in 20 some odd years.
Okay, well let's drill down. How did you prepare yourself for all this sound work?
Oh, I went to college. That's one thing I'm actually trained in, which is always my joke. Whenever I get in trouble, I say, well, what do you want from me? I'm a sound guy. I went to college at Fredonia, SUNY Fredonia, for sound recording technology. Graduated in '86, spent about 5 years in New York. Had a good time with it, but decided I hated New York. I don't hate New York. I hated living in New York. So I moved back up here, discovered there was no studio work outside of New York City. So I started trolling the world for live audio jobs and ended up here.
So
and I haven't left.
And you started out just doing like day work. You weren't...
Oh, I was hourly. I was an hourly union guy. I got called in to do the shows. So if we weren't busy, I wasn't busy.
And you were working other places probably
Actually, even at the very beginning, because the first job I did was early November. By the time we decided we wanted each other, so to speak, we were into December and it gets busy. And I don't really recall outside of summer, which I did have another job,
you got to
doing a lot of other work because I was too busy here.
So you were a regular and
I was a regular right
time.
Off the rip, yeah. That was a pre-air conditioning, and we did no summer programming outside of movies. So I worked for Specialized Audio at SPAC for a few summers. So I did the SPAC Proctors Bounce, which works out nicely because the one season ends as the other season begins.
So then you became production manager.
Became production manager.
In that?
The production manager is the person, at least in our building, I'm sure the job is a little different elsewhere, but in our building, versus the technical director, the production manager is the person who interfaces with the roadshow, who makes sure that they have everything from stagehands to food to hotels if they need, and any other kind of peculiar thing that they might need, and make sure that that's ready for them when they show up. That's basically what the job is.
So how do you know what they're going to need?
Oh, you have it starts with a contract that has a tech writer. Tech writer spells out what they need, hopefully, and then leading up to the show, you get in contact with someone and have conversations. When I was doing it, largely phone call. We didn't have a lot of email, although it started to become more in vogue towards the end of my production manager. But there's a lot of chasing people down with phone calls. I remember trying to get a hold of somebody who was touring in Japan, and that was fun. There's just no email, and we're trying to catch each other 13 hours apart.
Wow. So you knew from the writer what they wanted, and you went shopping and whatever it took.
Largely, most shows, obviously, they need labor of some sort, so you arrange that. They need technical things, whether it's audio from you or lighting or particular effects or whatnot. They'll often need some sort of hospitality food, whether it's catered on-site or arranged off-site. Sometimes we're responsible for housing. Sometimes we're responsible for transportation to and from. So depending on the way the contract read, you arrange all that stuff.
So the big stars have to have their limo?
Yeah, the big stars have to have their limo and that sort of thing.
Of the right color?
Right. Well, actually, there's only a few that were a little particular about that. So there's certain folks who don't like white limos.
It's tough.
It is tough. I knew who had a black limo, though. It's surprising how few they are. I guess marriages in white limos, I don't know. But
Well, then you became manager of operations over the whole...
Right. Well, what happened was Philip showed up in 2003, two, right? I should be accurate when I'm on tape, huh? As we were starting to seriously start thinking about the expansion project, Philip was brought on board, and I worked with him a lot in the design of the stage, which was a really cool opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, especially since it's the building that you end up working. So you had a say in how it was put together. And as that process was going, also Bob was interested in doing a little less, and the timing was good. So by the time it came out of the expansion, we already knew who we were going to hire for production manager, and kind of dovetailed out of that job really as the expansion happened. I did the first couple of shows. We opened in December and hired Keith in January. So I had a month of kind of doing
Keith
both.
Schmidt.
Keith Schmidt is now our production manager, has been since we hired him January 1, 2006. And so he's working on his 10th year, coming up on 10 years here. And we share him with Chautauqua, which is kind of crazy. That's another subject. He works very hard. But that's where I started to get into the operations director full-time. And it worked well, because then we also had the interfacing of the new venues. When we went from being a one-trick pony, so to speak, to multiple venues in all sorts of different sorts of events that cross different venues that we never really had the ability to think of before. So the operations director job is a little bit more expansive than it was before. So it was a good timing to grow the staff.
So
there.
just let's name the facilities that we
Okay,
have.
the facility. The rooms that I concern myself with now are the main stage at Proctors, GE Theater at Proctors, the underground at Proctors, which is the education center in the basement, which is a pretty robust, from the standpoint of booking, performance space. It's very raw. We have the 3 upstairs conference rooms, the gallery and the Albany International Room and tailor-made room. The gallery is sizable enough and works well for performances of up to about 100 people, like the education center. And we have Key Hall. Key Hall, we don't really operate. It's operated by Mazzone Hospitality, but we do throw a few events in there as well.
So you are the liaison if we go to Key Hall, for example.
Yeah, it's still one of our part of our agreement with Key Hall is that we can do X number, I forget what the number is, events as if it were our venue. We do Albany Pro Musica, I know, which works well. It's still not set up well to be a performance space, and has been, frankly, too successful as a banquet space to really want to push that around. That's just my opinion. I think going in, Philip and I had this thought that it could be a nice 400-seat space, and we were thinking of lighting, but not only have other things
Especially
detracted
for
us. Yeah, other things have detracted us. The Capital Rep relationship and UPH relationship have sort of distracted us, and plus that doesn't need any help. Again, the Mazzone folks are making it a very successful property.
So when Proctors entered into the relationship with UPH and Capital Repertory Theater, what is your role at Capital Repertory Theater?
Well, my role at Capital Rep is the same, theoretically the same as it is here, less production. In Proctors, I'm in charge of production, front of house folks, maintenance, housekeeping, basically anything building related. And the same is true in Cap Rep, less production. Production is given to the artistic staff because it's a producing theater, and Maggie has control of all aspects of the artistic development, which production is part of. So I don't manage the production staff there, but I do manage a staff of 1.5 there, basically, and some per diem house managers, and our maintenance staff does our best to maintain the building. Assuming a similar arrangement would be at UPH once they're up and running. Frankly, from my job's point of view right now, UPH is more like GE Theater was in 2004. It's lines on paper and opportunity to get, design, get in on the design end of it, which is fun. But they won't really be, we're doing some things now, but once they close and renovate, they won't really be on my radar for a couple more years.
Just for everyone's information, UPH is?
Universal Preservation Hall. It's an old 1860s, I think, church in Saratoga that we recently entered a similar agreement that we have with Capital Rep. A bunch of, as I describe it, a bunch of historic building folks in Saratoga saved a lovely old building, and once they saved it, they kind of realized they didn't exactly know what to do with it, and they reached out to us to form this alliance so that we would program it. They're very excited. I'm excited for this project. This is Capital Rep and UPH are very different relationships and have positives for very different reasons. Capital Rep was about saving a 40 years now, right? 40-year-old producing theater in a small market, which is a rare treasure to have. So that's about keeping that alive. Whereas UPH is an opportunity for growth. It's kind of neat in a city that we believe will embrace it. So while we talk about them internally kind of similarly, they're very different projects in my mind.
Well, the relationship is the same, but the product is totally different.
Right, the functional relationship is the same, but that's about it. You're right. Capital Rep is a producing organization that has existed for 40 years. UPH will be most likely a presenting rental organization like we are here at Proctors. And it's sort of the neat thing about UPH is there are no preconceived notions. Anything is a good idea at this point, which is fun.
So now all they have to do is raise $4 million.
All they have to do is raise $4 million. That's it. No big deal. But
they're doing well so
they're
far.
doing well, and this is a community that wants it. And we learned with our experience here at Proctors, when the community really wants it, finding the money is not that it's easy, but it's not as hard as one might think.
You know, I've always been amazed how much sharing back and forth among the various entertainment venues there is of certain types of equipment.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I know the folks at every venue in the neighborhood, actually, in the area. We've shared resources with the Egg. We shared resources with Troy Music Hall. Funny story about getting a phone call in the morning that Andrea Bocelli was playing at the Times Union Center because they don't have any steamers. And they ended up dragging a steamer down there. As in steamers
making your clothes
for
wrinkle-free.
wardrobe, exactly. And I brought down a steamer, and I was rewarded with an upgrade of my tickets, which was kind of nice. I had tickets that evening, and the promoter found out and said, "Oh, I can upgrade your seats."
But it could be sound equipment or
yeah. I mean, I know
a small stage or.
In the case of UPH, obviously they don't have much, so we've been kind of giving them what they need for the last few months as the few events they do have right now happen. We're bringing risers down in a couple weeks. And then they're largely going to close next spring and for the renovation, knock on wood, assuming the money's there.
It's just amazing, you know, people may perceive us to all be in competition with each other, but underneath the surface,
Oh, it's friendly
there's
competition.
a lot of collegiality and.
Oh yeah. It's sort of like if you talk to pro football players, they're beating each other up on the field, but if they meet the next day on the sidewalk, it'll be a pat in the back because they're colleagues, really. And I feel like we're the same way. Another example, we were sort of forced. I say that because I was the one that didn't really want to do it, but to upgrade our spotlights here at Proctors, we had spotlights. They were old, but they look great, and I was the camp that said, what's wrong with them? But the industry just wanted something different. Broadway is getting ridiculously bright, frankly, and 2,000-watt spotlights we owned weren't good enough anymore. So we just recently bought 3,000-watt spotlights of a different brand that makes our Broadway folks happy. And we sold the, well, I assume we have. I haven't gotten the check yet, but we sold the 4 2,000-watt spotlights to the Palace because we share the same stagehands local, the one I used to work for. And they knew of the upgrade of the spotlights, and they came to me and said that what they have at the Palace is not adequate for the shows, and they're constantly hearing it from shows. So we had a dialogue with the Palace, and I kind of sold it to them for pennies on the dollar, partly to be a good neighbor to the Palace, and frankly, partly to be good to the folks who are actually my crew too, because really it's the guys in the ground that take the beating when the equipment isn't what the show expects. So this will help them out, and they're very appreciative, and the Palace is appreciative. So we earn brownie points that way, and not that it's easy to find a buyer for a 2,000-watt spotlight anyways, frankly.
I haven't bought one for years.
Yeah, exactly. I haven't bought one in years. I actually bought one 10 years ago. I bought 4 3,000-watt spotlights a few months ago, which is kind of funny.
Are they all installed?
Oh yeah, we actually what happened was the Broadway shows were forcing us to rent, and it became financially intelligent to own. And what we did was we were supposed to buy them in June for Kinky Boots. Was that June? Yes, for Kinky Boots. And the rental company that we bought them for, we bought them used, wanted them for the summer. So they allowed us to deduct the rental for June's show from the eventual purchase price. So we sort of bought them in June and let them
So
rent them
every
all
day
year.
you're making little deals.
Every day's a deal. You know, I always joke, I've been here 25 years, the budget has exploded, but it's still the same game. It's,
Yeah.
you know, you still have to be very frugal, almost cheap in certain ways so that the product on
And
stage
you're sort of
isn't.
famous for that. You make budgets and you stick to them.
Oh, I do. I'm pretty good at the cafe. I'm pretty proud of. Did a cafe renovation this summer that could have easily gotten way out of control, and I think we spent $2,000 over budget, $50,000 budget. I think we got about $100,000 worth of stuff, though, between
We had a few.
sponsored painting and donated cabinet and furniture. Yeah, we did quite well, quite well.
That's great, because
Yeah.
you always, unfortunately, in the nonprofit world, you're trying to get help.
Exactly. I think we're starting to suffer a little bit from our own success because we have a perception of being rich and powerful and successful in that way. We are very successful, but we're no more rich than we were 20 years ago. It's sort of the nature of nonprofit, as you know.
Life is tough for nonprofits
Yes.
right now.
Yes, it is. It is. And we're doing very well.
So you have alluded to this relationship we have with the IATSE, the Backstage
Stagehands
Union,
Union, yeah.
Stagehands Union. They've made quite, I mean, we have quite an interesting relationship with them about kind of sharing our people.
Yeah, well, when I started, we had an odd contract where, we still have it, where there's 5 allowed to be staff before the union is involved. And then that their show requires more than 5 people, the contract worded is, that the local will provide the additional staff. When I got here, it was a pretty contentious situation. There was definitely a union, non-union thing going on. There were times when none of the people who were staff were actually at a show if it was a union show. Yeah, they were in the load-in, but they got sent home. I remember a famous story of trying to get keys during the middle of a show because they had sent everyone home who had keys. And it was a little bit of this going on. There was a gentleman who was running the local at the time who turned out to not, how do I politically put this, not be too on the up and up. And to the stagehands' credit, they solved their own problems internally. They found out what this guy was doing. They voted him out. They wanted to sue him, frankly, and they weren't allowed to do that. And there was a gentleman named Dick Ryder who was one of his henchmen, for lack of a better word, when he was running it. Protege, yeah, that's about. I called Dick Gorbachev because Dick was from the old realm, realized the old realm wasn't the right way to go, and helped usher the local into being a open, more democratic, place. And when he got to that place, realized that he was not the right person to continue being the business agent because he was from the old guard, and he kind of graciously let the next person run, who's been running it ever since. And the folks who run it now, it doesn't hurt that I was a peer with them. I mean, the folks who are running it, I was working alongside of in 1993, and I continue to keep membership in the local 20 years later for relationships, and it's just not a bad idea once you have a union card. You never get rid of it, I guess. But our relationship with them is very friendly. Our last union negotiations for contract, I think, lasted 15 minutes.
So backstage, you have what personnel?
So what has emerged since the early 90s was the folks who were, I mean, a lot of us are still there. There's folks there who have been there. Jim Peterson is approaching 30 years, 1988, so 2008, yeah, so he's 27 years right now. These guys were part of those entrenched folks who were the non-union battling with the union now have union cards. And my entire staff are carded members of the local. There still has the same staff-union relationship, but because the staff we're talking about are carded members, there's no hostility. As a matter of fact, they're all department heads leading the group when the rest of the union comes in, as opposed to the guy who gets kicked to the curb. So it's a radical turnaround from that point of view. In my opinion, it has saved us countless money over the years, because nothing worse than butting heads with your labor constantly,
Right.
as far as money. And taking this a step further, now that we're doing theater techs, our relationship with the local has done us both an enormous deed, in that the techs have been enormously happy when they get here. And they point to the labor as one of the first reasons why. their willingness to do what needs to be done, not worry about counting nickels, assuming that, you know, they're going to fight for the folks that they feel like are not getting paid properly, but they're not pulling the old classic union tricks to try to get somebody a 4-hour call because somebody picked something up or something stupid like that.
So
you don't see that anymore.
When we tech a show,
Right.
maybe you could talk about what
Yeah,
that means.
tech. A few years ago, Philip noticed that, well, he'd always noticed that theater techs were happening in other states. He knew about it. They were tax credits for teching a show in Rhode Island and Alabama, and there's another state I forget. And the Broadway companies would go to these places because all the money spent in that state would be creditable for the state taxes. And Philip always, on the one hand, felt like, why are these New York companies, because Broadway is all New York companies, going to other states, obviously, for the tax credits? Why can't we keep them here? And he also noticed that there was a film credit already approved by the Senate Assembly, or it was already law, that was not being fully utilized. The film credits had a cap, and they were not 50% used on an annual basis. So Philip went to the governor's office and asked him to expand the scope of those tax credits to include teching Broadway shows, which worked like a charm. Not only did the Broadway producers happy to be closer to home, but they realized that all their New York expenses that were happening on every other tech, rehearsing the cast in Manhattan, for example, are now also creditable. So we went from behind all those other states to now the first choice, we being New York State, not just Proctors. So it's more financially logical to tech in New York State now because it opens the scope of the tax credits. So ever since that happened, this is the third straight year we've teched a Broadway show. Now, what a Broadway show tech is the birth of a Broadway show, for lack of a better word. Assuming a show's on Broadway, it's successful, the producers want to mount a national tour, they have to get together, the creative team, to make a touring version of the set, touring lighting, touring everything, and it all gets designed, ordered, made, delivered, and it gets delivered to the theater at which it's teching. And the process is about a 3-week process where they put together the show, make sure it all works, and then about a week later the cast shows up, who had been rehearsing in New York for that week probably, and then they start to interface the cast with the equipment and the stagehands, the road stagehands who run it, as well as the designers being on site to make sure everything's working well. They go through that process for about 2 weeks, and then they open the show here. And then after
Or whatever
the
they
show's
call
run,
it, because we don't always
we don't
say
usually
open.
get opens, that's true. Well, that's another thing. I think they like teching in a small market because they're able to do what they call a week of previews instead of opening for the national press. And they open for the national press in Chicago or Boston or Hartford or some place like that, where they do have a bigger market to open to. You're right, the last show wouldn't even let our local folks review it the week it was here. They made them go the week afterwards.
So who have we teched so far?
We've teched Ghost, we've teched Newsies, and this past fall we teched Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder. Next year we have a couple, 3, knock on wood, I can't name yet, that so it's really beginning to blossom. Again, I credit the stagehands a lot. I credit our location because we're a 2.5-hour train ride from Manhattan, which is extremely
Right.
useful.
And they love the fact there's a downtown train.
There's a downtown train. I mean, the
Station.
Manhattanites can walk to Penn Station, get on a train, walk to the theater, do their thing, walk back to the train station, and be home for dinner. They can't do that
And
if they're
they're
in
very
Alabama.
well received by the restaurants. And
Oh yeah. Well, the locals absolutely love it because it's
and it's
so
a
much
big
free
deal.
money. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal for going back to the labor guys. I mean, it was one reason why they're so happy is because they're getting a lot of work that they wouldn't get, and they appreciate it and understand that they're getting a lot of work they wouldn't get. So probably one of the reasons why the customers are so happy. But then there's the downtown, hotels and restaurants. I mean, not only do we have a road show here for a week that's typical of the activity it creates, but this is a road show with designers and directors and producers here as well, and discussing things at night and entertaining people at night. So the amount of impact it has on the community outside of the 8 shows is much, much bigger. I mean, it's a big deal for the restaurants. Love it, and plus the folks are here for a month, so they start to get their favorites, and they start to actually be temporary regular customers.
So when you, backstage, you have someone who, I mean, tell me what jobs the 4 or 5 people you have that are your
Okay,
key.
Our 5 key people, well, the backstage staff actually is 7 people. The 2 managers, Keith, we mentioned before, is production manager. Jim Peterson's our technical director. Those 2 guys are salaried. They're not a part of the crew. The 5 guys on the crew are sound, lights, and flymen, and 2 other stagehands who, in the union world, end up being props and carpenters. In the house world, it's less of a theatrical kind of thing. It's usually comedians and bands and so forth. So they're basically there. The other 2 guys are there to do whatever needs to be done to set up the show, and they typically run spotlights. So a typical house show at showtime is sound, lights, flymen, and 2 spotlights.
So very often we have shows right on top of each other.
Oh, yeah, very often.
And what would be a typical example, and you don't need to mention, but of how that all happens?
Well, there isn't a typical example. Well, I guess there is, but there's
Well,
just
just
so
give
many
us one.
so many
Right.
permutations of what typical is. Sometimes we have a weekend coming up next weekend where we have Mavis Staples' Joan Osborne show. So we have a pop music, blues music show that's all in-house equipment that ends at 11 o'clock at night. We have to get rid of all that in-house equipment and accept a ragtime tour that has a 3 p.m. matinee opening the next day. I don't know. I haven't
So
talked to
11
Keith.
p.m. you close.
So 11 p.m. the one show ends. Between 11 p.m. and what could be as early as 3, probably more like 5 or 6, is the load-in for ragtime, in which all that stuff that we had in the area on stage needs to be gone. So after the Joan Osborne show, we have to clear out all that equipment.
Like somewhere in the basement?
We put it in.
Wherever.
We own our own equipment, put it in boxes, and it ends up in the crossover largely, actually.
Okay.
Unless the big show makes us put it all in the basement, like Lion King. Well, actually, in the case of Lion King, they empty 2 trucks and then take 2 trucks and put our equipment on it, and it goes away for a month. That's always scary, just to keep space. But largely, it's kept in the crossover. So they'll dump all the lights and cables and stuff.
The crossover is
the space behind the stage. So they'll
that you
put all
can't
this stuff
see
in a
when
box.
you look at the stage.
Right,
It's
and
behind
just
it.
push it. It's basically a loading dock area.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll push it back there and get out of the way for ragtime. Now, ragtime's not an enormous show, so I wouldn't be surprised if it's 5 or 6 load in, but it could be as early as 3. So we could have folks basically not going home. That's the worst case scenario. But to pepper 3 or 4 one-nighters in a row is not uncommon. Hopefully, sometimes Bruce, our lighting person, has to take 3 or 4 pieces of paper that have a diagram of lighting and try to figure out how to hang all of them at once so that they can...
So they're ready.
So they're ready, so we can go from show to show to show without a lot of labor. It takes a little compromise, takes a little negotiation with the folks on the road, and it takes a little bit of no, too, sometimes.
And then when you meet Bruce and you find out that he's got a little handheld...
Actually, that's his phone.
Doesn't he run some of the lights? from
You're right, he has a handheld device, too, but he can actually run his lighting board with his iPhone now.
It's just
kinda cool.
amazing. I mean, technology has really changed.
Yeah, we actually just upgraded our lighting control. We still have lights that are 50 years old, but the control system that's running it is state of the art, and it's really pretty slick. I always tell the story of he was a best man or a usher at Derek and Carrie's wedding on stage, and he made the lighting change for the kiss while he was standing on stage, kind of going like this and pushing his phone. I just thought it was the funniest thing. All the lights come in.
We ought to have a demo of that in our show.
Yeah, exactly. Except, I always said we got a demo of that wedding. It was one of the prettiest weddings I ever saw, but what a lousy business for a theater. We don't have enough capacity.
People were vested in making sure it worked.
Yes,
because it
yes.
was
That
two
was an in-house
employees.
one. That was an
Yes.
in-house wedding, correct.
Special.
Very special, right.
So the one thing you do that I find absolutely amazing is keep this building operating with all its parts.
Right,
And you start with the calendar.
right. Oh, the calendar.
So people that's on computer, right?
Right, a calendar's a website.
So if a person wants to use the theater, they talk to either you or Kate Kozaneski.
Right,
Or they could be a department head at Proctors that has
right.
some kind of thing
Some
they
kind of
need
thing they
to
need
do.
to do, exactly.
So it gets on the calendar, and if you happen to take someone else's spot, they send you a message back and says, oh no, you can't do that.
Right, and actually the calendar does it automatically, right?
But there are times when every single building, room in this building is going to be used.
Right, and sometimes multiple times, right?
So you're in charge of managing
Yeah, we're
that.
constant. The game is constantly. I joke that we don't look too far ahead because it would confuse us too much. We're basically looking. My department. That's not entirely true. We obviously plan far ahead, but from the engine that runs the place, we're looking 2 or 3 weeks ahead, and making sure everything has the tables, chairs, people, food that they need. And as it comes closer, all the notes get put on the calendar, and everybody looks at the calendar, does their piece of the pie, and hopefully everybody's. The calendar is such a vital cog to this.
So you have housekeeping that has to set up.
Housekeeping that has to set up an event will look on the calendar. The technicians who need to know what is expected will look at the calendar. After the event happens, information about what happened goes onto the calendar so finance can bill it. So it all gets put in and out of this website
And now that
calendar.
we're trying to expand our internal catering.
Oh yeah, with
That's-
Shaw. Well, I mean, we did do catering in-house. We certainly, I don't want to discount what was done before. We did, we were doing the board meetings for about a year before Shaw came, as an example. But once Shaw came, and our ability to do food, not just sandwiches and chips, for lack of a better word, has really expanded that. I see that as a huge growth potential in the next 2 years, is packaging the whole thing. And we've done a lot of events now where we kind of we've learned from a zone and learned from Shaw that, a customer wants to see a package in a lot of instances. They don't want to hear about room rentals and labor and this and that. They want to know their event costs $6,000. And oddly enough, usually when you're packaging the price, it ends up being better for us than it would be if we piecemealed it and confused the customer and had an outside caterer. I see it growing quite a bit.
So do you have nightmares about all this working out?
No.
You're a pretty easygoing guy.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the beauties of what we do for a living is, I
You're
always
used
joke.
to crisis.
Well, I mean, at 11 o'clock at night, the show's over, is the way I look at it. I mean, hopefully it was a knockout show, most of them are, but, if something did go wrong, you pick yourself back up and go to the next show. I'm a Patriots fan, it's on to the next game. Whether you won or lost, it's on to the next game.
So what is the most fun part of this job?
My fun, I kind of miss as I've progressed in 25 years here, it's getting close, I kind of lament the fact that I get further and further away from the art from a job function point of view. I mean, when I was a sound guy, I'm talking to the singer, I'm asking what he wants, and I've got my finger on the fader that everybody's hearing. That's deeply involved in the art. And then the next job was, okay, well, I'm not running it anymore, but I'm getting to, immerse myself into the process and help them have what they need to make the show happen. But now that I'm operations director, first of all, my backstage production staff are outstanding, so they need the least support of all the, little sub-departments I
Lucky.
have.
Very
Very lucky. I have an excellent crew, longevity like crazy. And so there are times when someone will ask me what the show is on stage, and I'll kind of smirk and say, I don't know. I mean, that's how far from the art I've gotten. I didn't, I just forgot what today's show was. But the thing that kind of juices me, and my wife gets mad at me sometimes when I come to work too much, but I remind her, it's like, if I don't see people enjoying themselves at 8:30, then it starts to become drudgery. But if I can come down often enough and see the reaction of the audience, see a standing ovation at the end of a show, then, you kind of get the little chill, and it makes it all worth it. Makes
That's
the hassle
great.
all worth it, yeah. And there's nothing like the sound of a satisfied audience at the end of a show. That's the coolest sound.
That sounds like a nice benediction for our show.
Yeah, isn't it? Isn't it? Might be a nice benediction for me someday.
Well, we'd like to thank Dan Sheehan for being with us today on October 26, 2015.
Pleasure.
Dan, so nice to have you, and
Of course.
I'm always amazed how much you achieve, and because you never sit down,
Balls in the air, balls in the air.
never sits down. Just
Yeah, I know
keeps
this is the
going.
longest I've sat down in
And
weeks.
If you want to find him, you have to go look around. But texting him works.
Texting him works. Texting me, actually, email's even better.
So thank you so much, Dan,
Absolutely.
for being
Anytime.
here and sharing your view of this historical theater and how it's grown and deals with more modern
Okay.
issues.
You
Thanks.
think of more stuff, I'll come back.
Okay.